Are you ready to learn the truth about how the northern tribes survived in the bitter cold, where any mistake cost a life? Canada's extreme temperature variations made the winter months a harsh test of human endurance. The thermometer dropped to levels where metal became brittle and breath instantly turned into an icy crust on clothing. At such moments, a person could hear a howl beyond the wall of snow, but couldn't tell if it was wolves or the piercing wind. Nature became a merciless enemy, demanding perfect preparation and flawless decisions from people. In this video, we'll take a detailed look at exactly which engineering and practical solutions allowed indigenous peoples to withstand the elements without access to modern technology. Some of these methods are so well thought out that their principles are still applied in modern expeditions. Stay with us until the end to see exactly how the ingenious technologies of antiquity helped people survive deadly snowstorms. What if everything you were taught about snow is outdated? Snow in northern Canada has never been just frozen water. For the Cree hunter, it was a challenging building material and, at the same time, a treacherous enemy. In the bitter cold, every snowflake lost its softness and turned into a sharp, icy needle. These needles were driven by a fierce wind, creating a dense curtain over the endless plain. The hunter made his way back to camp, barely able to make out his own tracks from that morning. The temperature was plummeting, turning the loose snow crust into a solid shell. His wooden snowshoes emitted a dull creak with every heavy step on the icy crust. The wind erased landmarks, turning the familiar forest into a labyrinth of white shadows. The hunter knew that a navigational error would have serious consequences. The subarctic climate dictated its own harsh rules for moving through the forest. Winter clothing retained body heat but prevented dangerous overheating. The hunter moved steadily, avoiding excess moisture on his skin. In the bitter cold, moisture instantly turned into a crust of ice. Every movement had been perfected over centuries of adaptation to the extreme northern cold. The forest around him was rapidly plunging into thick evening darkness. The trunks of old fir trees creaked hollowly from the internal tension of their freezing sap. This sound carried far and wide, merging with the roar of the wind. The sky took on a heavy, leaden hue before the powerful onslaught of the elements. Nature seemed to hold its breath before the onset of a crushing snowstorm. The camp was located in a low-lying area, sheltered from direct gusts of wind. The site was chosen based on the terrain and the density of the trees. The tall trees served as a natural barrier, breaking up the powerful air currents. This approach significantly reduced the wind pressure on the leather walls of the dwellings. It was a precise engineering solution based on an understanding of the laws of nature. In the center of the valley stood sturdy conical dwellings made of bound poles. They were covered with tightly sewn caribou or moose hides. Their shape was perfectly suited to withstand strong snowstorms. Snow did not accumulate on the sloping walls but slid smoothly downward. At the base, a thick snowdrift formed, creating an additional layer of reliable insulation. The hunter finally made out a faint orange glow ahead. This dim light served as a reliable beacon in the raging white mist. The smell of wood smoke unmistakably pointed the way home. The smoke lay low to the ground due to a sharp drop in atmospheric pressure. This sure sign pointed to a long and relentless blizzard. Preparations for the long night began long before sunset. Gathering dry firewood was a continuous process requiring enormous effort. People used only dry coniferous wood for a steady heat. Logs were stacked in a special way at the entrance for quick access. Any delay in maintaining the fire threatened a sharp drop in temperature. The hunter approached his dwelling and carefully pulled back the heavy flap. Inside, he was met by a wave of thick, life-saving, warm air. He quickly brushed the snow off his outer garments with a bone scraper. The tiny ice crystals were not supposed to melt on the dry fur. After that, he pulled the flap tightly shut, sealing off the interior from the storm. Outside, the storm began to gather its destructive force. The wind hurled handfuls of sharp snow against the taut leather walls. The contrast between the warmth inside and the cold outside was striking. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. What do you think about this kind of preparation for winter? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Guess how long it took to create this unique dwelling? The Cree's conical tent, known as a mikivap, was perfected over many generations. At its core was a frame made of long, flexible spruce poles. They were tied together at the top, forming a sturdy and stable cone. This geometry allowed the weight of the snow to be evenly distributed throughout the structure. The outer shell was sewn from dozens of carefully treated hides. The hides were degreased, smoked over a fire, and rendered waterproof. Smoking prevented the material from hardening in severe frost. The hides were stretched tightly over the wooden frame with great effort. The edges of the shell were pressed firmly to the ground with heavy stones or logs. Inside the dwelling, the space was organized according to strict rules of efficiency. The center was always reserved for the hearth, lined with smooth river stones. A thick layer of spruce branches was spread around the hearth to insulate it from the cold ground. Soft hides were laid over the fresh branches to create a comfortable floor. Every item of household goods had its own strictly designated place on the shelves. Warm air from the central fire rose straight upward. It heated the inner surface of the leather walls, creating a comfortable microclimate. A special ventilation opening was left at the top of the cone. It served as a chimney and ensured constant circulation of fresh air. Special flaps allowed the size of the opening to be adjusted depending on wind strength. During blizzards, these smoke vents became critical. Long poles on the outside allowed their position to be adjusted without going outside. Camp residents turned the valves into the wind to create backdraft. This prevented snow from getting inside and drew out the acrid smoke. Proper adjustment of the valves required considerable experience and constant attention. The air gap played a huge role in retaining precious heat. During the harshest frosts, an additional layer of thin leather was stretched inside. A buffer of warm air formed between the inner and outer layers. This thermos-like principle reliably blocked the penetration of the biting cold. Even at extreme outside temperatures, it was possible to stay inside without warm clothing. The conical shape had another important aerodynamic advantage. Wind currents flowed around the smooth leather walls with minimal resistance. The force of the elements was distributed evenly without loosening the supporting wooden posts. The structure flexed slightly under the impact of squalls but remained stationary. This flexible resistance was far more effective than rigid fixation. The snow accumulating around the base served as an additional barrier. People deliberately did not clear the snow drifts adjacent to the walls of the dwelling. The compacted snow sealed any cracks at the very surface of the ground. It completely prevented cold drafts at floor level. The winter camp literally grew into the snow cover, blending in with the landscape. Internal order was maintained with military precision. Wet clothes and shoes were never scattered around the living space. Special hanging frames above the central hearth were used for drying. Dry items were immediately stored in leather bags to protect them from dampness. The organization of daily life eliminated chaos, which could have cost people their health. The genius of this architecture lay in its absolute mobility. If necessary, the entire camp could be packed up in a matter of hours. Poles and skins were loaded onto long sleds for transport. What do you think was the most important piece of clothing on a night like that? Even more so than the warmest fire. In the next chapter, you'll discover the incredible secret of subarctic tailoring. I will reveal the best-kept secret of survival in extreme cold. The Cree's main protection against the cold was not the thickness of their clothing, but its unique structure. Subarctic tailors used reindeer hides harvested at a strictly defined time of year. Autumn caribou hides possessed incredible thermal insulation properties. Every hair on this hide was hollow inside, creating a microscopic air cushion. This porous fur structure functioned like modern high-tech insulation. The air inside the hairs prevented body heat from escaping. At the same time, this fur was surprisingly light, not restricting the hunter's movements. Heavy clothing would have caused rapid fatigue when walking through deep snow. The lightness of the gear was a critically important factor for survival. The traditional winter outfit consisted of several carefully fitted layers. The inner layer was always worn with the fur against the body for maximum heat retention. The outer layer was worn with the fur facing out, reflecting the cold wind and snow. Warm air circulated between these layers, creating a reliable barrier. This principle of layering is used today in the manufacture of mountaineering gear. Footwear deserves special attention in the arsenal of northern survival. Winter moccasins were sewn with high tops that tightly hugged the calves. Special insoles made of dry grass or rabbit fur were placed inside the moccasins. The grass absorbed excess moisture, keeping the feet completely dry. These insoles were replaced regularly to prevent frostbite on the toes. The seams on the clothing were stitched with animal tendons with precision. The tendons had the property of swelling when exposed to moisture. This naturally sealed the seams, preventing the penetration of water and wind. The sewing tools were the finest bone needles. The process of creating a single winter outfit took many weeks of painstaking labor. Mittens were always attached to a long leather cord draped over the neck. Losing a mitten in severe cold meant losing one's fingers within minutes. They were sewn to be incredibly roomy so that one could wiggle one's fingers inside. Movement maintained blood circulation and prevented the limbs from freezing quickly. The cord ensured that the mittens would never be blown away by a sudden gust of wind. The hoods of winter jackets were trimmed with long wolverine fur. Wolverine fur possessed the unique property of not becoming frosted by human breath. Frozen breath on the face could cause severe frostbite. The trim created a warm air pocket directly in front of the wearer's face. This allowed one to breathe relatively warm air, even in strong headwinds. Caring for this clothing required the strictest discipline and attention. Any snow that had stuck to it had to be brushed off with a special stick before entering a warm place. Melting snow turned the precious fur into a useless, icy crust. Damp items were dried slowly, away from open flames. Direct heat could dry out the fur, making it brittle and fragile. The design of winter clothing remained unchanged for many centuries. Every detail was dictated by harsh necessity and the laws of heat exchange. There was not a single decorative element in these garments without a practical function. Survival depended on the flawless condition of every seam and every fastening. Tailoring skills were valued in the tribe on par with hunting skills. This engineering approach to clothing saved the lives of generations. The perfection of the design has been tested by thousands of harsh northern winters. Today, engineers study similar principles when developing spacesuits. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the technology of the past, please like this video. Your support helps us create more detailed analyses like this. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about is the speed at which temperatures drop. A blizzard in the subarctic isn't just heavy snowfall with wind. It's a rapid invasion of Arctic air that paralyzes all life in its path. In just a few hours, the temperature could plummet by tens of degrees. The sudden pressure drop caused a deafening roar in the treetops. The air became so thick and cold that it burned the lungs upon inhalation. Visibility was reduced to arm's length. One completely lost one's bearings amid the swirling white whirlwinds. Snowdrifts grew at an alarming rate, transforming the landscape beyond recognition. Nature was demonstrating its absolute and crushing power. Inside the camp, a quiet, focused determination was building. People checked the strength of the fastenings, securing the outer skins to the frame of the dwelling. Additional stones were placed along the edges of the canopies for secure anchoring. The firewood supply was moved closer to the hearth to minimize unnecessary movement. All cracks were carefully plugged with bundles of dry grass and moss. Special attention was paid to the ventilation holes at the top of the cone. Adjusting the draft under such conditions became a complex mathematical problem. A strong wind could easily blow out the fire or fill the dwelling with smoke. The position of the smoke vents was adjusted every few minutes, depending on the direction of the gusts. This required constant monitoring by the most experienced members of the camp. Food supplies were rationed to avoid having to go outside. High-calorie foods, such as pemmican, became the main source of energy. Fat and dried meat helped the body generate internal heat. Food was eaten in small portions, but frequently, keeping the metabolism going. Under such conditions, food was as much fuel as the wood for the fire. Outside, snow piled up in huge drifts, engulfing the base of the Mikivap. Paradoxically, this snowy shell became the main source of protection. It absorbed the brunt of the icy wind, dampening its force. Inside the leather walls, a zone of relative calm was established. The noise of the storm turned into a dull, monotonous hum. Every movement inside the dwelling was deliberate and economical. Unnecessary fuss could lead to accidental damage to the structure or the overturning of utensils. People sat in a tight circle around the central hearth. Their shoulders were covered with extra fur blankets to retain heat. Conversations were held quietly so as not to waste energy on loud shouts. The light from the fire illuminated their focused faces from the semi-darkness. There was no panic in their eyes, only a deep understanding of the elements. They knew that their lives depended on the strength of the poles and the quality of the seams. Centuries of ancestral experience served as a reliable foundation in the struggle. The blizzard outside tested the strength of every engineering decision. The fire in the center burned with an even, controlled flame. Too much fire could lead to a blaze, which would mean certain death. Too little heat would allow the deadly cold to seep inside. Maintaining the perfect temperature balance was a true art. Logs were added one at a time, strictly as needed. The darkness of night finally engulfed the snow-covered camp. The storm reached its peak, turning the surrounding world into chaos. How intense do you think the psychological pressure must be in such isolation? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they cope with this terrible weather. Stay tuned. The best is yet to come. The physical impact of the storm on the Mikivap structure was colossal. The wind slammed into the leather walls with the force of a heavy battering ram. The hides stretched to their limit, emitting a low, vibrating sound. The frame of fir poles creaked as it bore the dynamic load. Snow pellets lashed the surface like millions of tiny shards of glass. The cone's aerodynamics forced air currents to flow around the obstacle. The wind vortices at the top created a powerful smoke extraction effect. This prevented carbon monoxide from accumulating inside the enclosed space. The geometry of the dwelling worked in perfect harmony with the laws of physics. The force of the elements paradoxically helped maintain internal ventilation. The outside temperature dropped to critical, lethal levels. The air humidity fell to zero, freezing out any remaining moisture. Trees in the forest cracked along their trunks with a thunderous roar. This sound pierced even through the howl of the raging blizzard. The surrounding nature was being tested by absolute cold. The snow level around the dwellings rose before our eyes. Drifts concealed the heavy anchor stones at the base. The resulting snow wall completely blocked drafts from entering through the floor. The dwelling found itself in a kind of protective capsule made of dense snow. The white shell reliably insulated the interior from the external cold. A complex temperature gradient had established itself inside the leather cone. At floor level, the temperature was only slightly above freezing. At the waist level of a seated person, the thermometer would have shown quite comfortable readings. Hot air and thick smoke accumulated right under the dome. People instinctively chose the optimal height to conserve heat. The firewood in the hearth burned slowly and almost completely. The carefully selected coniferous wood produced no flying sparks. This was critical for preventing the skins from accidentally catching fire. The hot coals radiated a steady and powerful infrared heat. The heat penetrated deep into the body, relaxing tired muscles. Every gap in the canopy was securely sealed. Thick fur blankets blocked the cold emanating from the frozen ground. Coniferous brushwood beneath the skins gave way and created an air pocket. The resinous scent of pine needles mingled with the aroma of wood smoke. This unique microclimate was familiar to every camp resident from an early age. The absence of windows made the space feel enclosed and infinitely small. People's attention was focused exclusively on the central source of light. Shadows from the flames danced across the smooth surface of the stretched walls. Sounds from outside came through muffled, as if from beneath the depths of water. The outside world ceased to exist, giving way to the reality of the warm circle. Time in such conditions was measured not by the clock, but by the number of logs that had burned. The rhythm of life was governed by the strict cycle of keeping the fire going. Every action was aimed at conserving energy and heat. Economy of movement became the main rule of survival during this long night. The camp sank into a state of deep concentration on basic processes. The wind continued to furiously batter the shelters without the slightest sign of fatigue. Snow whirlwinds rose high into the air, obscuring the sky and the stars. The blizzard had reached the stage where space turns into a homogeneous mass. The camp had turned into a tiny oasis-like speck amidst a raging ocean. The people inside were silent, listening to the ceaseless roar of the winter elements. The secret for which people pay thousands lies in the psychology of isolation. A night surrounded by a raging blizzard became a serious test for the human mind. A snowstorm in the northern forests is not just bad weather, but powerful psychological pressure. The incessant roar of the wind, reminiscent of a beast's howl, exerted immense pressure on the nervous system. A person felt like a grain of sand in a vast ocean of chaos and cold. At such moments, the enclosed space of the Mikivapa seemed like the only safe place in the universe. It intensified the feeling of complete isolation from the rest of the world and civilization. The walls of animal skins trembled under the gusts of the elements. reminding one of the fragility of existence. In such extreme conditions, panic was far more terrifying than any physical cold. It could paralyze one's will and lead to fatal mistakes. Control over one's own thoughts was just as important a skill as the ability to start a fire in a damp forest. For years, the hunters had trained their minds to maintain clarity in the silence or the roar of a storm. They knew how to enter a special state of calm contemplation of the campfire's flames. This allowed the brain to rest and replenish its resources even on the most dangerous night. Such a trance helped them completely tune out the terrifying sounds of trees snapping outside. Emotional stability ensured that a person would not make sudden, rash movements. Chaotic actions in a blizzard instantly led to catastrophic consequences. Inner peace was their main weapon against external entropy and the destructive force of nature. The stronger the wind raged outside, the quieter and calmer one had to be inside. It was a true battle of will against primal fear. At such moments, the dwelling turned into a veritable lifeboat orbiting an icy planet. The walls of animal hides were the only barrier between life and absolute nothingness. People understood that their world was limited to this small cone of poles and leather. Outside, the elements raged, impossible to resist by force. All that remained was to wait and keep warm inside their small refuge. Group solidarity reached its absolute and vital peak during those long hours. Mutual support was expressed not in words, but in silent presence in joint actions. Every movement of a neighbor was understood without unnecessary explanations or loud commands. The simple passing of a warm mug of pine needle tea replaced any long and complicated conversations. The warmth of the drink and the kind gaze of a fellow tribesman warmed the soul no less than the fire itself. The synchronized breathing and the rhythm of tossing firewood united the people into a single living mechanism. Personal individualism completely gave way to the harsh reality of collective survival. Every member of the group felt responsible not only for themselves, but also for everyone around them. This unity gave them the strength to endure the hardships of the long winter and endless storms. The tribe survived only when it acted as a single entity. The ability to listen closely to the elements allowed experienced people to predict their future behavior. Elders and hunters could discern the slightest changes in the pitch of the wind howling beyond the walls. They knew that a drop in pitch usually indicated a possible weakening of the air currents. Sudden pauses between violent squalls warned of an imminent change in wind direction. This knowledge helped them prepare for a new onslaught of the elements or for a long-awaited lull. The soundscape was practically the only available source of information about the outside world. By the sound of falling snow or the crackling of ice on the river, people understood what was happening outside. Nature constantly sent signals that one had to know how to interpret correctly. A mistake in the weather forecast could cost the lives of the entire group that had decided to leave their shelter. Therefore, everyone inside had their hearing sharpened to the limit. In this absolute isolation from the rest of civilization, the true power of ancient traditions was revealed. Important knowledge was passed down to new generations, not through complex lectures, but through the correct sequence of actions. Every movement of the seasoned hunter was imbued with a deep respect for the destructive power of nature. The young people watched the elders and learned to maintain their dignity in the face of danger. Traditions were the foundation that kept society from falling apart. People never tried to conquer the elements or fight them on equal terms. They skillfully adapted to its rhythms, finding niches for safe existence. This flexible philosophy ensured the tribe's stability over many centuries and millennia. The wisdom lay in being part of nature, not its master. It was precisely this attitude that allowed people to survive in the harshest corners of the planet. The heat from the central fire gradually relaxed muscles that had been tense from constant stress. However, even in such moments, sleep on a stormy night remained light and very fitful. Someone always had to stay awake to monitor the flames and the ventilation system. They had to make sure sparks didn't land on the dry hides or the sleeping people's clothing. The group's safety depended on one person's vigilance. The duty by the fire was passed on without a word, usually with just a single brief knowing glance. The responsibility for the lives of the entire camp rested on the shoulders of everyone keeping watch that night. They had to add firewood in time so that the temperature inside wouldn't drop to a critical level. At the same time, they couldn't let the flames get too strong, as that could damage the shelter. It was a delicate balance between warmth and safety. The blizzard raging beyond the thin walls gave people not the slightest reason to truly relax. The pressure of the snow masses on the mikvap's structure continued to grow steadily with every passing hour. The snow could block the exit or cut off the air supply from below, which was extremely dangerous. How difficult do you think it was to maintain warmth under such a force of nature? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they managed the fire in an enclosed space. Get ready to dive into the intricacies of subarctic heat exchange engineering. The physics of fire management in a conical dwelling were perfected by ancient engineers. The central hearth in such a house was never just a random place to burn wood. It was a highly complex radiant energy generator, requiring daily and very precise calibration. Every log and every stone played a role in creating a comfortable microclimate. People understood the laws of physics on an intuitive level, passing this knowledge down by word of mouth. The size of the fire was always strictly proportional to the total volume of the mikvap's interior. A flame that was too large would instantly burn up all the precious oxygen inside the cramped dwelling. This would lead to suffocation or the need to open the flaps, releasing all the accumulated heat. A small fire, on the other hand, would not be able to warm the walls and protect people from the biting cold. The skill lay in finding that perfect balance in the fire. The well-thought-out design of the hearth necessarily provided for a flow of cold air at the very bottom. This flow entered under the lower edge of the skins and gently fed the flame with oxygen. It was important to organize the airflow so as not to create dangerous and cold drafts around the feet. Fresh air seemed to flow into the center of the dwelling, giving life to the fire and the people. This ensured the cleanliness of the atmosphere even during prolonged stays inside by a large group. Hot air rushed upward in a powerful vertical column, straight toward the ventilation opening. This natural thermal pump ensured constant renewal of the atmosphere inside the shelter. Smoke and combustion products were expelled outward, without lingering in the living area. The system operated completely autonomously, using the energy of the flame itself to function. This design was far more efficient than many modern methods of stove heating. The uppermost layer beneath the dome was a hazardous zone of carbon monoxide and soot. Smoke vents located at the top of the cone reliably drew this toxic layer outward. A person standing at full height could feel the difference in temperature and air quality. Therefore, most daily activities in the dwelling were performed while sitting or lying down. This was dictated not only by convenience, but also by safety rules. Proper smoke management was the most complex and critical element of this thermal system. The wind outside constantly changed its direction and the pressure at the outlet of the ventilation opening. Adjusting the angle of the external flaps allowed for the creation of the necessary negative pressure to draw out the smoke. If the draft was disrupted for any reason, acrid smoke could instantly drop to eye level. This required an immediate response from those who were conscious. In such cases, the person on duty would immediately adjust the position of the long poles controlling the valves. You had to feel the wind direction with your skin to set the dampers outside correctly. A mistaken adjustment could fill the entire space with smoke in a matter of seconds. This art required many years of practice and a deep understanding of the laws of aerodynamics. An experienced host could control the smoke so that the dwelling smelled only of cleanliness and dry pine needles. Firewood was always selected with special attention to its specific heat output. Dry larch or spruce burned for a long time, leaving behind dense red embers. It was these embers that provided the main heat, which was so valued on cold winter nights. Birch bark was used exclusively for quick kindling, as it produced too much soot when burned for a long time. People knew the properties of every tree in the forest and used them as effectively as possible. Wet or rotten wood was strictly avoided due to the risk of heavy smoke. Gathering the right kind of dry fuel was the key to ensuring a safe and warm night for the entire group. Men spent a great deal of time searching for the perfect firewood, capable of producing a steady and strong heat. Good firewood was valued on par with the meat they hunted, for without heat, survival in the Arctic is impossible. The fire demanded quality fuel, just as the human body does. The intensity of the fire was regulated by how tightly the logs were stacked against each other. A dense stack of wood significantly slowed the process, ensuring a long and even smoldering. Spacing the logs out provided a quick and powerful burst of heat for emergency warming of frozen people. All handling of the burning coals was done with special long wooden tongs. From the outside, this process resembled the very precise tuning of a complex musical instrument. Infrared radiation from the fire heated not the air itself, but the solid objects around it. The leather walls, wooden frame, and people's thick clothing effectively absorbed this radiant heat. The heated surfaces of the dwelling, in turn, became secondary sources of gentle radiation. This created a thermal sphere that tightly enveloped all the camp's inhabitants. This allowed them to feel comfortable even when temperatures outside were very low. This heating method was several times more effective than the usual convective heat distribution in homes. The air could remain fresh and cool, while people's bodies were well warmed. This prevented the development of illnesses and helped the body recover better after hard work. The geometry of the cone was ideal for this distribution of energy flows inside the dwelling. Every detail of the interior worked to conserve precious calories. The ash that gradually accumulated at the bottom of the hearth also served as an excellent insulator. It prevented the heat from the coals from escaping downward into the deeply frozen winter ground beneath their feet. Hot coals, deliberately buried in a thick layer of ash, could retain their temperature for days. In the morning, the hunter need only fan these coals slightly to quickly build a new fire. Not a single calorie of energy was wasted or squandered in this ingenious dwelling. The coordinated work of all elements of this ancient system ensured the reliable survival of humans in this harsh land. The fire, the geometry of the walls, the ventilation, and the animal skins worked together as a single, complex organism. A malfunction in even one small detail threatened inevitable disaster for all inhabitants. Attention to the physical processes inside the cone was constant and very intense. Fire remained man's chief ally in his endless struggle against the Arctic cold. Night watch by the fire was never a time of idle waiting. People used these long hours to meticulously maintain their gear. In the harsh conditions of the north, life depended directly on the integrity of every item. A damaged snowshoe or a torn glove could have fatal consequences. Routine work helped maintain focus and provided a distraction from the howling storm. First and foremost, the condition of the leather boots and moccasins was checked. They were carefully hung at a safe distance from the open flame. Even drying prevented the natural material from shrinking and hardening. Once dry, the leather was thoroughly kneaded by hand to restore its elasticity. If necessary, the seams were additionally rubbed with animal fat to seal them. Snowshoes required no less painstaking and careful maintenance. The wooden frame was inspected for micro cracks caused by severe frost. The rawhide webbing could weaken from moisture and stress. Loose straps were carefully tightened and securely fastened with knots. Reliable snowshoes ensured the hunter's mobility in deep snow after a blizzard. Tools and weapons were cleaned of even the slightest traces of condensation. Moisture on metal or stone would turn into a thin layer of ice in the cold. The ice could jam mechanisms or make handles dangerously slippery. Surfaces were wiped dry with a piece of soft hide and lightly greased. This procedure was repeated after every return to a warm room. Women mended clothing using bone needles and sinew. Any seam that had come apart on a jacket threatened serious heat loss. Stitches were laid close together, restoring the garment's original strength. The work required good lighting, so it was done near the central fire. Skilled sewing provided reliable protection against the biting icy wind. At the same time, food supplies were being prepared for the coming days. Frozen meat was shaved into thin slices using special sharp knives. These slices were easy to reheat or eat raw. Pemmican was divided into equal portions for easy distribution among the group members. Proper meal planning saved time and energy during daylight hours. As they worked, people exchanged quiet remarks about the condition of their equipment. The elders' experience was passed on to the young in the form of practical advice and guidance. Learning took place continuously, woven into the fabric of daily life. Every action had a deep meaning, honed by generations of ancestors. Survival traditions were not merely rules, but the foundation of their existence. Spare materials were always stored in a dry place right under the dome. Moss, dry grass, strips of leather, and tendons were sorted into bags. This ensured quick access to necessary materials at any moment. The orderliness of their belongings reflected the inner discipline of the winter camp's inhabitants. Chaos was unacceptable in conditions where every little detail mattered. Routine manual labor calmed the mind, relieving the psychological tension of the night. Focusing on small details dispelled the fear of the raging elements. The monotonous movements of the needle or knife put a person into a state of light trance. This conserved the nervous energy needed to overcome the difficulties of the next day. Work served as a kind of meditation, maintaining inner balance. By morning, all the necessary work on the equipment had been completed. The gear lay ready for use, dry and securely repaired. People could afford a little rest before dawn. The storm raged outside, but inside, absolute order reigned. The camp was ready to face the new day fully prepared. A turning point in the blizzard occurred shortly before dawn. The nature of the howling wind began to change imperceptibly, losing its deafening fury. The continuous roar broke up into separate gusts and brief periods of calm. Atmospheric pressure, which had fallen to extreme levels, began to rise slowly. Experienced hunters unerringly read these subtle signs of the element's retreat. The snow's impact against the taut leather walls became less forceful. The fine cutting grains gave way to larger, heavier flakes. This indicated a slight warming in the upper layers of the atmosphere. The cyclone that had battered the camp all night was moving further east. Replacing it was a massive anticyclone with extremely low temperatures. The draft in the ventilation opening stabilized, requiring less attention from the person on duty. Smoke from the fire rose in a steady, dense column without sudden swirls. The smoke vents were fixed in a single optimal position. The interior of the mikvah was filled with steady, even warmth. The tension that had hung in the air all night began to gradually subside. The temperature contrast between the shelter and the street reached its peak. Inside, it was comfortable thanks to the hot stones and layers of fur blankets. Outside, the frost gripped the ground so tightly that the trees creaked with double the force. The air cleared of snow dust, becoming transparent and incredibly dense. Breathing such air without face protection was deadly dangerous. People began preparing to emerge from their protective cocoon. They slowly put on their dried clothes, carefully smoothing out every crease. Their multi-layered suits transformed them into invulnerable explorers of the icy desert. Their boots were laced tightly to prevent even the slightest bit of snow from getting inside. The moccasins and snowshoes were fitted together with perfect precision. Their faces were covered with special fur masks, leaving only narrow slits for the eyes. A long strip of wolverine fur formed a protective barrier against the biting air. The hunters' movements became slower and more measured due to the abundance of layers of clothing. Their appearance inspired deep respect for their endurance. They were fully equipped to face a changed world. They had to open the canopy with the utmost caution. Overnight, a massive snowdrift had formed outside, blocking the exit. The hunters used wooden shovels to carefully dig a tunnel. The snow had compacted so much that it could be cut into neat rectangular blocks. This work required physical effort, but it was carried out quickly and methodically. When the exit was first opened, a cloud of thick white steam burst into the dwelling. The warm, moist air instantly crystallized upon contact with the freezing cold. The temperature difference was so sharp that the steam settled as frost on their faces. This visual effect vividly demonstrated the harshness of the outside environment. The barrier between life and death became tangible and visible once again. The tunnel they had dug led them to the surface of a changed world. The lowland where the camp was located was completely buried in deep snow. The conical roofs of the mikvahs barely rose above the white dunes that had formed. The familiar terrain had been erased by the colossal force of the passing storm. All landmarks had to be re-established in this new reality. The wind finally died down, leaving behind only a light breeze. The sky cleared of heavy, leaden clouds, revealing pale stars. The frosty air stung the lungs even through the fur masks on their faces. Nature stood still, awaiting the first rays of the cold northern sun. The hardest part of the ordeal was behind them, left in the darkness of the night. The silence of the morning was absolutely deafening after the storm's hours-long roar. In this stillness, every rustle seemed incredibly loud and distinct. The creaking of snowshoes on the frozen crust carried for miles around. Even people's breath in the frosty air created a loud rustling sound. The world had frozen into a state of icy stasis, brooking no commotion. The landscape appeared before the hunters in pristine whiteness. The snow dunes shimmered in the rays of the rising sun with thousands of diamond-like sparks. The light was so bright that it could easily cause snow blindness. The men squinted, shielding their eyes with bone goggles featuring narrow slits. This simple device protected their vision from the aggressive ultraviolet radiation. There were almost no traces of the night storm left on the snow's surface. The wind had tightly packed the snow crust, turning it into a smooth, icy road. Snowshoes no longer sank in, but glided over the hard surface. This made movement much easier and saved the hunters precious energy. Conditions for tracking prey had become ideal thanks to this hard crust. The camp members methodically inspected all the structures, assessing the damage. The leather canopies withstood the test of the squalls without a single tear in the seams. The protective snow berms at the bases of the dwellings had only grown stronger. The pole frames retained their proper geometric shape under the weight of the snowdrifts. The engineering calculations of the ancient builders proved their absolute reliability. Restoration of the camp's full operations began without delay. The smoke vents were cleared of the ice that had frozen overnight. The supply of firewood left outside had to be dug out from under the thick snow. Every action was carried out efficiently without wasting energy. Life was returning to its usual strictly regimented routine. The hunters began reading the refreshed book of forest tracks. The storm had erased all the old prints, leaving a pristine canvas. Any new track on this canvas was now exceptionally fresh. This gave them a huge advantage in searching for animals that had taken shelter from the blizzard. Nature, having unleashed its fury upon them, now presented new opportunities. The air remained extremely cold, but the absence of wind made it bearable. The temperature contrast had ceased to be dynamic and had turned into a constant threat. The cryogenic suits worked flawlessly, retaining body heat in this cryogenic world. The people moved with confidence, demonstrating complete mastery over the harsh conditions. Their survival was the result of knowledge, not blind luck. The morning sun rose slowly above the horizon, bringing no physical warmth. Its cold rays merely illuminated the majestic scene of the frozen northern plain. The trees, covered in a thick layer of frost, resembled crystal sculptures. This harsh beauty was an integral part of the indigenous people's lives. They did not struggle against nature. They were a harmonious part of it. The experience of the past night became another page in the tribe's unwritten chronicle. The small details of survival were passed down from person to person. The children, safe inside their dwellings, absorbed the calmness of the adults. This is how an unyielding character was formed, capable of withstanding any trials of the North. This legacy was stronger than any stone monument. The Cree camp continued its unseen existence in the midst of the snowy wilderness. Plumes of smoke rose peacefully from the conical roofs into the clear blue sky. The blizzard had passed, leaving the people victorious in this quiet but brutal struggle. Their survival techniques had proven their effectiveness in the face of absolute cold. A new day brought new challenges that required no less skill. We have examined only a small fraction of the amazing technologies that helped the Cree survive. Behind every engineering solution in their conical dwellings and clothing lies 1,000 years of experience. This knowledge proves that the human mind is capable of adapting to the most incredible conditions. What other ancient survival techniques do you think deserve our attention? Suggest topics for future videos you'd like to see on our channel in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.